A sister-in-law? You finally got one. Anyway, big weekend, right? People made it back safe and sound, so that's good. Lots of neat things happening. So the church just got a whole lot smaller. You know, the church, we say it's a small world, and here we got another family, connected. Anyway, Proverbs 23, you notice in these sections, the last chapter, and this chapter and to come, we're kind of going back to similar to what we began with. There's a lot more personal statements and paragraphs that we're going to be looking at in relation to Solomon writing to his son and what he's saying. And so we're going to pick up in 23, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 5. So when you sit down to eat with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat. If you are a man given to appetite, do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. I meant through 3, sorry. We look at this, and this was a confusing verse, so I had to, I tried to read up on this as well, so I understood it. What we're talking about here is be careful when you sit down with this individual, as far as we sit down with a ruler, because don't let your indulging cause you to spill the beans, as far as say things, do things that you wouldn't normally do because of gluttony or because of what's before you. And so here again, really another statement about maintaining your integrity during life situations, right? And so maybe you should put this under section 27, joy and fulfilled life. And so warning against you, being careful, and that's what it's talking about. Put a knife to your throat. Who puts a knife to your throat? You confused like I was in the beginning? You do. You do it to yourself. It's talking about self-control, right? Self-control. So that's what it's talking about. All right, any questions or comments? Okay, verses 4 and 5 together. Do not overwork to be rich because of your own understanding cease. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings, or they fly away like an eagle toward heaven. And so, sometimes we say riches do what? They come and what's Solomon saying? Be careful. Don't make your life's focus. Lauren's not here. I got to get my own ESV, right? What's that? You got to? Okay. So, don't overwork to be rich. What happens when this life's over? Yeah. Have you ever known anyone that has passed away and had nothing? Have you? Everybody has something, don't they? Right? Job, what did Job say when he lost everything? What did he say about how he came into this world? Yeah, with nothing. Right? He's saying, with nothing I came in, and when I leave, what am I going to take with me? Nothing. Right? And so we make our life's ambition, right?
Mine says, although others discourage laziness, they also discourage overworking for the purpose of greater wealth.
So you think about that. What's the word that I think about is balance, right? And that's something I heard a long time ago, and I don't know who told me, but our Christian life is a balanced life. Okay, and so that's a good point you made. You don't work so hard that that's your only focus or your main focus in life, but you don't not do anything either. Okay, all right, and so again, we could put this with our sections that have to do with industry and laziness, maybe section 13. All right, any questions or comments? All right. We're going to look at verses 6 through 8 together. Again, we see the paragraphs coming back, and we're going to see more personal statements as we keep going. It says, Do not eat the bread of a miser, nor desire his delicacies, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. The morsel you have eaten, you will vomit up and waste your pleasant words. Eric, you want to read that in the ESV for us?
Do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies, for he is like one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink. He says to you, but his heart is not with you. Will vomit up the morsels that you have eaten and waste your pleasant words.
Okay. Honestly, I don't use the ESV very much until we started going through the book of Proverbs. And so some of the words that are used to help us understand these are interesting to me as I think about them. Calculating, right? He's counting what you're eating and how much you've eaten. And so why is that? What's verse 9 tell us? What's the conclusion? So do not speak in the hearing of a fool. Wait, verse 8 is where I went in. He says, he will vomit up the morsels that you have eaten and waste your pleasant words. What's he doing?
Plotting to take advantage of you.
That's right, plotting to take advantage of you. Okay. And so then we look at verse 9. I think it falls in the context here. It said, do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. Is that miser, the miser in the New King James and in the stingy man in the ESV, is he a wise man? No, he's not a wise man. Okay, so warning is against these individuals. And so again, we've got to maintain our character. And you think about these in this chapter that we've looked at, we're talking about people who are setting a snare for you. It seems like good things, but who has to be on guard? Yeah. And so when we go back and we think about what was mentioned a few minutes ago about the balance in the Christian life, when you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, one of the things that's condemned is evil surmising. What's evil surmising? Always suspecting that someone's up to no good, right? Okay, so that's the one extreme. But in this, it's a warning to ourselves that we need to be what? Careful and wise, right? And so you think about that. Is that a difficult balance? You sit down at the table and say, this guy's got something against me. I know he's up to no good, but you can't think poorly. So you think about that balance, right? And so that goes to our wisdom. You know, we need to act appropriately in those situations. All right, any questions or comments? Verses 10 and 11 says, do not remove the ancient landmark, nor enter the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is mighty. He will plead their cause against you. And there was a mention of this in verse 28 of the preceding chapter about the landmarks. What's a landmark? What do we use today instead of landmarks?
Trees. Turn left at
Tree, right? Survey stakes, right? Survey stakes. You ever heard of anybody moving survey markers? I have heard stories of people moving survey markers. I'd love to move mine way out, right? But that wouldn't be right or appropriate. And the warning here is because in verse 11, you may get away with it, right? But who's going to see? God. And he's going to deal with you appropriately, right? And so when you look at 10, we see the ancient landmarks, nor enter the fields of the fatherless. Who's the fatherless? Okay, we're talking about people who are as disadvantaged, right? Because their protector, their guardian. And so we talked last week at the end of Bible class, we talked a little bit about this as far as just because you could take advantage of somebody, does that make it right? No, it's still wrong. You say, well, I'd never get caught. You don't take advantage of them. And so these fatherless are people that are they're I hate to say victims, they're easy victims, right? Okay, and so that's the warning. And so here, the Proverbs writer, Psalmist telling his son, said, don't take advantage of the people that are easy to take advantage of, because God still knows he's watching, and he'll take care of that, okay? And so you think about that, and I really think this goes with the nature of God in section 8 was a good place to put that, these sections. All right, any questions or comments? Verse 12 says, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to the words of knowledge. There's two things we think about here, when I went to school, I learned a lot about learning, and I learned to be a better learner. I'm still not a good enough learner, but we learned a lot about that. And one of the things that one of the teachers talked about was, he said, reflective thinking. What's reflective thinking? I don't know, I'd have to think about it. That's what it is, right? And so when you look at this, it says, apply your heart to instruction. What does it mean to apply your heart? Where's your desire? Do you want to understand? You know, when you sit down and you try to do your homework with your children's homework with them, one of the problems is their desire to learn, right? If a person doesn't want to learn, are they teachable? No. And so here, apply your heart to instruction. Desire to know. Then, he says, and your ears to the words of knowledge. So we've got to desire knowledge. Once we do that, once we desire, Solomon says, open up your ears, and you'll find it. Okay? And so we think about this. Maybe section 1, when we think about wisdom, would be a good place for this. As we think about the desire. Section 24, the words of the wise. All right, verses 13 through 14, 13 and 14. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod to deliver his soul from hell. What's the principle here? What's discipline for? To teach. It's for safety and protection, isn't it? You know, we went to Horseshoe Bend in Page, Arizona. We've got to take Dad there twice. And so there's, I don't know, it's a quarter mile down to the canyon below. It's at Glen Canyon. Anyway, it's a long ways down. And there's just a little portion of it with a rail. And Dad, he does not understand why they don't have a rail along the whole thing. But the thing is that fence is designed for what? For protection or safety. Okay, it's for training. So when you look at this, you think about what's being done. What are we doing? What's a conscience? Remember watching Pinocchio as a kid? Yeah. Let your conscience be your guide. What's the problem with that? It has to be trained. It has to be trained correctly. Okay. So what the idea is do not withhold correction from a child. If you beat him with the rod, he will not die. What's the design? Is it to hurt the child? No. It's to train the child. Okay, and we're not talking about abuse. There's a big difference between discipline and abuse. And we can understand the difference between that. It says, you shall beat him with a rod to do what? Yeah, to deliver him, right? Get that fence up. You're training his conscience so he doesn't fall over the side. You're down that long cliff to destruction. Go ahead, Barton.
I think it's interesting that in verse 12, the word Hebrew word for instruction can also mean discipline.
Instruction, discipline.
And it follows,
Yeah.
that follows right on into 13.
That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't notice that when I went through this. Does the child think they're going to die?
Yeah.
Does our society, you say yes. Does our society teach that a child may die? Again, there's a difference between abuse and discipline. And we've got to know the difference and realize the difference. Okay, parents and children, we think about this, section 21. Verses 15 and 16, my son, if your heart is wise, he says, my heart will rejoice indeed, I myself, yes, my inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak right things. Again, this is a personal instruction that's given from Solomon to his son. And what is the joy in his father? Go to the New Testament, what makes God happy? When we do what? When we obey. Okay, same principle. So when you look at this, my son, if your heart is wise, You think about this, honoring your father and mother. How was Solomon asking his son to honor him? Now you think about this. Everything that Solomon is doing for his son is for his own benefit and advancement, right? But on the sidelines of that, who also has a blessing associated with that? Solomon, right? And so all through the book we've seen these warnings that Solomon says, son, do these if you want to have a good life, if you want to have a blessed life, if you want to be right with God, if you want to have a hope of eternity, all these things. And then here's Solomon says, and by the way, I'll rejoice in your decisions, right? I'll be honored in your decisions. And so you think about that. Okay. Look at 16, something else I thought about when we were going through this. When he says, yes, my inmost being will rejoice. We're talking about satisfaction, right? We're not talking about fun. Where was that? We're talking about where were we at? Were we together? Talking about the difference between joy and happiness. Was that where it was? Okay. Anyway, so we're talking about the joy aspect, right? Not something fun, but it's talking about satisfaction, right? Appreciation. Then at the bottom says, when your lips speak what? Right things. The problem that I thought about in our society is we're backwards as parents a lot of ways because we want our children to have a fun life. Do what's fun and I'll be happy for you. Do what you want to do and I'll be happy for you. But what does Solomon say? When your lips speak right things. So he's also saying there's wrong things. And which goes back to the fences, the discipline that was in the preceding section. All right, any questions or comments? All right, we'll try to keep moving. This is a little bit longer chapter. Verse 17 and 18 together. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day, for surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. I think that 17 is something because sometimes we look at people outside the church and say, boy, I kind of wish what I had, you know. I remember an older person in the church telling me one time, you know, he said the time that a Christian devotes to the church, the rest of the world, they don't lose that time. And he wasn't talking in a negative sense about what, you know, the service and the time that you devote. But he said, do we really realize that it takes a lot of time to be a Christian? And it takes away time from our families sometimes, from our jobs sometimes, our hobbies sometimes. He says there's a lot of time invested in that. And I think there's a struggle sometimes with that as far as, do we envy those people? You know, well, I got to go to worship service. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. That's our responsibility because we're trying to do the right things for a right life, okay? So don't let your heart envy sinners. On the judgment day, will you envy sinners? You think that Noah, as the ark began to float, said, boy, I wish I was like them. What did the nation of Israel say? Say, we want a king so we could be what? Like all the other nations. What did God give them? I believe Saul was a king like the other nations. And they didn't appreciate that. Okay, so we think about that. All right, questions or comments? All right, verses 19 through 21. It says, hear my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix with winebibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. And this is really something we're going to see kind of a theme through the rest of the chapter. Most of the chapter is going to talk about this type of thing. And so we're talking about people who are living for physical satisfaction, right? That's what he's talking about. He said, don't be like that. You know, there's a fellow I met. I've met him several times. I've spent a little time with him, and I've never seen him without a cigarette. And I said, I wonder how much money that guy spent in a lifetime on cigarettes, right? That's his choice, right? That's his choice. But you think about that. Talking about self-satisfaction, physical satisfaction. And so, joy and fulfilled life, section 21, we're going to see a lot of that as we keep going. Verse 22 says, listen to your father who begat you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. And so, what's he telling? Honor your parents. When you think about that, the relationship between parents and children, he's supposed to have an honor, a respect for his parents and what they're trying to teach him. Do you think, have you ever thought, the Solomon's son, is he glad that he's being told all these things? Yeah, how embarrassed would we be, Aaron, if our parents wrote us a letter and God said, of course this is by inspiration, I understand, but God said, we're going to let this be for generations to read. Think about that. But anyway, again, Solomon's parents were just trying to help him. Verse 23 together says, buy the truth and do not sell it. Also wisdom, instruction, and understanding. We've seen the principle throughout the book of talking about the value of truth and righteousness. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Why wouldn't you sell it? I used to do a lot more wheeling and dealing, and sometimes I'd pull in and ask somebody if they wanted to sell something, and they would say, I would never sell that. Have you ever heard anybody say that? I would never sell. Why? Huh? Really? Anyway.
Only every once in a while. Usually you say you sell everything.
Probably so. But the idea that we're talking about here is the truth is so valuable that once you get it, you can't afford to lose it. You think about that. Do we realize the truth? Is that important? We should. Anyway, section 27, a joy and fulfilled life is a good place to put that. Verses 24 and 25 says, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. Again, this is very similar to what we just saw as far as bringing delight to our parents in doing what? In living a good life, right? I don't know. I've never had to call my parents and tell them that I'm in jail, come help me. But that would probably be a phone call that I wouldn't make, right? Yeah, you think about that. And so, all right, we're going to look at verses 26 through 28, kind of continuation. My son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. For a harlot is a deep pit, and a seductress is a narrow well. She also lies in wait as for a victim and increases the unfaithful among men. We saw statements about the trap of the harlot, paragraphs as we began the book. And we see this again. He's going back. Brother Cates, not Dan Cates, but his father, Curtis Cates, taught also in school. So I had both of them as teachers. And so Curtis Cates, when he talked about preaching, he said, tell them what you came to tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you came to tell them what you just told them. That's what he always taught about when preaching. I remember him talking about that. He'd write it on the board up front sometimes. You think about that. Solomon started the book writing about these similar things. What's he gone back to? Same statement. Okay.
Solomon apparently wrote these before he departed away.
Before?
Right? Before he came straight.
Or after he came back. And that's the question. That's the question is there's a lot of discussion as far as in what situation did Solomon die, right? It's difficult to determine. There's a lot of discussion. We sit down and have a coffee over it sometime because I've gone both ways. And the thing is, it doesn't matter to me. Solomon knew at the beginning, and when he wrote this, he knew what was right. So whether this was before he departed, after he came back, did he feel this way, depart and come back? Book of Ecclesiastes, talks about the remorse of that riotous living, right? But we also know that he didn't live a long life. And what did God tell him in the promise? He says, I'll give you fame, riches, and wisdom, And if you're faithful, I'll give you what? Okay. And so the question is did God take away from his life because of his period of unfaithfulness? Or did Solomon die because... You got an answer to that? That's difficult, right? Something good to think about, right? Jonah, I believe, is left in a very similar light. Because when we leave the book of Jonah, what state would you consider Jonah in? Saved or lost? Yeah. Okay. The way his attitude in life towards those down the hill from him, he could not be saved in that state. The question is, did he repent? I hope so. Right? I hope so. All right. I don't know if that answered your question, Kathy. Probably confused it more.
Yeah, 'cause finally, I don't have coffee.
Ron and I can have coffee, and you can talk about it. No more coffee. Well, I didn't have any coffee this morning. All right, we were short on time and long on chapter. Let's look at verse 29 through the end of the chapter here. Who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contention, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eye. If we stop there, really this is a summation of the statements that are going to be talked about here through the end of the chapter. Who are we talking about? If this was a treasure hunt or a riddle, alcoholics, that's what we're talking about. And so this isn't the first time, and it's not the last time that we're going to have warning against the use of alcohol in the book of Proverbs. So those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. And so I think about verses 30 and 31 as in similar idea to Psalm chapter 1. And when you get to Psalm chapter 1, what was the warning? It says, blessed is the man that does not what? Walk, stand, or sit, okay, in the way of sinners. So when I look at 30 and 31, it says, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around. And so what's Solomon mentioning? The things that draw people to it, right? And evidently those people were walking in the way, started to stand in the way, and finally they're what? Sitting, right? They're seated there. And their attention, they're intently drawn to everything about the alcohol. And that's what's going to be talked about here in verse 32 and following. It says, at the last, it bites like a serpent. What does it look like in the beginning? When we look at, especially verse 31, don't look at it when it's red, the beautiful color, when it swirls around smoothly. But he says, at last it bites like a serpent, it stings like a vapor. Go back to Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is brawling or raging, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Right? Solomon is telling his son, he says, I know it looks appealing, but what's the end of it? The end is the ways of death, right? We've heard that statement before. So, verse 33, your eyes will see strange things and your heart will utter perverse things. Sometimes you hear people argue for the use of alcohol. And a lot of times the term that's used is social drinking. I don't drink to get drunk. I just socially drink. I have a glass of wine before bed, those sorts of things, right? Have you heard people argue for those? Okay. And you look at this, he says, at last it bites like a serpent, stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, your heart will utter perverse things. What's he tell us? He says, stay away from it. Just stay away from it. Is there anything sinful about not drinking? No. And so, as we've gone through the book of Proverbs, if we were doing a study of that, we'd see there's nothing positive.
So how does Solomon know all this stuff if he never experienced it? God told him?
I think what he did, he could have, through wisdom, he would have been able to perceive the destruction that brings. But when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, I think there's a lot of this that Solomon was a part of. Okay, at one time in his life. Okay, we keep on going. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or one who lies down on the top of the mast, saying, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me. I did not feel it. I shall awake that I may seek another drink. And so all these things happen. You're unaware of it. But what happens? When you wake up, what do you want? Give me my next round. The thing that I guess I started to mention, didn't get my thought followed through, was this. There's a lot of people, proponents of, social drinking, that will argue the fact that in the old times, one, you had to drink because the water was unfit to drink. Okay, do a study on that. You can drink water throughout the ages. There's some water you can't drink, even today, right? And the other argument is that the alcohol in these time periods were so unrefined that there was not enough alcoholic content to affect you. You heard that? I've heard people argue that. What's Solomon tell you? Go down to the jail on Friday night, right? And you'll see people being led in that are described that you could describe the same as Solomon. So what's that tell us? Has anything changed? Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. All right, any questions or comments?